I watched as my husband gently placed my favorite pillow under her head. "You'll be more comfortable on the couch," he said to me. His voice was cold as ice. "Fiona, Ivy's apartment is flooded, and she has nowhere else to go. You don't mind giving up our bed tonight, do you?" Victor's question wasn't really a question at all. I stood frozen in our bedroom doorway at the audacity, one hand instinctively cradling my 5-month pregnant belly. Ivy was already sitting on our bed, on my side of it. She pretended to be scrolling through her phone as if this was perfectly normal. "It's just that the guest room isn't made up," Victor continued. When I didn't immediately respond, he continued. "And with your pregnancy insomnia, you're up most nights anyway." He smiled. That charismatic smile that charmed investors but never quite reached his eyes these days. "Of course," I heard myself say coldly, although everything inside me screamed to object. "I can take the couch." Ivy finally looked up, her perfectly glossed lips forming a sympathetic pout. "You're such a sweetheart, Fiona. It'll just be for tonight." The presentation drained me completely. I nodded, watching, as Victor, my husband of 6 years, gently placed my favorite pillow, the one I'd specially bought to support my growing belly, under Ivy's head. The pillow I brought home just last week. The one he'd complained about was an unnecessary expense. "You'll be more comfortable on the couch," Victor said to me, his voice cold as ice despite the warm smile plastered on his face. "The doctor said you need to keep moving anyway. Too much bed rest isn't good for the baby." That wasn't what the doctor had said at all. As I gathered my pajamas and phone charger, I caught Ivy's hand casually brushing against Victor's wrist, a gesture so intimate yet easily dismissible. 4 months ago, Victor first introduced his new executive assistant, Ivy. He called her a miraculous find, despite her suspicious lack of qualifications. Now I understood what qualifications had actually mattered. The living room couch was leather cold and slippery against my skin, unyielding to my pregnant frame. Sleep evaded me as I shifted uncomfortably. The baby was particularly active tonight, as if protesting our accommodations. Around midnight, I heard laughter from our bedroom, my bedroom, followed by hushed conversation. My phone buzzed with a text from Bianca, my best friend who worked in Victor's marketing department. "How are you holding up? Has he mentioned the London trip yet?" London trip? This was the first I'd heard of any trip. Once upon a time, I'd been Victor's first call for everything: business decisions, travel plans, celebration, dinners. Now I was lucky to know his schedule at all. At 2 a.m., parched and exhausted, I tiptoed to the kitchen for water. Victor's phone sat on the counter, forgotten. A rare occurrence for a man who usually kept it glued to his hand. The screen lit up with a notification, and I couldn't help but see Ivy and 3 little red hearts. "Miss you already. Wearing that thing you like." Sent the night before. My hand trembled as I picked up his phone. His password hadn't changed since we got married. My birthday, ironically. What I found shattered any lingering doubts. Hundreds of messages, explicit photos, hotel reservations, and plans for their business trip to London. I took screenshots and emailed them to myself, moving mechanically like the lawyer I'd been before giving up my career to support Victor's startup dreams. Evidence secured. I replaced the phone exactly where I'd found it. A sudden sharp pain shot through my abdomen, making me double over against the kitchen counter. "Not now." I silently pleaded with my body, with my baby. "Not when I need to think clearly." The pain subsided but left a dull ache in its wake. A warning. I'd lost 2 pregnancies before this one, each loss driving Victor further away rather than bringing us closer. This baby was my miracle, my hope, my future with or without the man sleeping soundly in our bed beside his assistant. I returned to the couch, mind racing through options, memories, plans. I remembered the day Victor and I met in law school, both brilliant and ambitious in love. How I'd eventually put my career on hold to help him launch his tech company. How we'd celebrated his first million with champagne on our apartment rooftop, dreaming of the family we'd build together. Where had that man gone? When had success transformed him into this cold stranger who made his pregnant wife sleep on the couch while he shared our bed with his assistant? As dawn broke, casting long shadows across our minimalist living room, I made my decision. While Victor showered, I slipped into our home office and retrieved the documents my old law firm colleague had prepared for me weeks ago. "Just in case," she said, seeing the writing on the wall. "The divorce papers are drafted and ready." Victor emerged from the bathroom, Ivy trailing behind in what was unmistakably one of my maternity blouses. I was already dressed for the day. A strange calm settled over me. "Good morning," I said, offering a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "We need to talk." "Mrs. Langley, your blood pressure is concerning me," Dr. Henderson said while reviewing my chart, while I sat alone in the examination room. "These numbers suggest you're under significant stress, which isn't good for you or the baby." I nodded, unable to explain that my husband was probably taking his assistant to lunch right now, instead of accompanying me to this critical prenatal appointment. "Is everything all right at home?" she asked with her kind eyes searching mine. "Just work stress." I lied. The same excuse I'd been using for months. "Fiona," Dr. Henderson said firmly, using my first name, "you've had 2 previous miscarriages. This pregnancy is already high risk. Whatever is happening, you need to prioritize yourself and your baby." She continued explaining the potential complications. My mind drifted to 6 years earlier when Victor and I first met. We were both ambitious law students. I was top of our class while he was the charismatic visionary everyone admired. When he first pitched his tech startup idea, I was the one who stayed up all night helping him draft the business plan. "I couldn't do this without you, Liv," he'd said, kissing me as the sun rose over our cramped student apartment. "We're going to build an empire together." I believed him when his fledgling company needed legal work but couldn't afford attorneys. I took the leap, deferring my offer from a prestigious law firm to become his in-house counsel. My parents had been horrified. "You're throwing away your career for a boyfriend's pipe dream?" my mother had asked incredulously, but it hadn't felt like a sacrifice then. It felt like an investment, a partnership love. For 3 years, we worked side by side, living on ramen and ambition. I drafted every contract, reviewed every partnership agreement, and protected his intellectual property while he coded and pitched to investors. When success finally came, it was spectacular. Victor's security software caught the attention of major tech companies, and suddenly our startup was valued at millions. The night we signed our first major contract, Victor proposed, "We built this together," he'd said, sliding a diamond ring onto my finger. "Everything I have, everything I am, it's because of you, Fiona." "Mrs. Langley?" Dr. Henderson's voice pulled me back to the present. "Did you hear what I said? You need complete bed rest if your blood pressure doesn't improve." I nodded absently, thinking about how quickly things had changed after Victor's success. The more influential he became, the more he began to rewrite our history. In interviews, I became my supportive wife, rather than my co-founder. At networking events, he'd introduce me as Fiona, my better half, with a charming laugh while launching into stories that erased my contributions entirely. After our second miscarriage last year, something fundamental shifted between us. While I grieved, Victor buried himself in work, returning home later each night, more distant, more critical. "The company's at a critical growth stage," he'd explain when I confronted him. "I can't afford distractions." Somewhere along the way, I had become a distraction. My phone buzzed with a text from Bianca. "Meeting just ended. Victor announced a company restructuring. You should know Ivy's been promoted to Chief Strategy Officer. The position we discussed for you, post-baby." Bianca had been documenting everything for months. Every instance of Victor's inappropriate behavior with Ivy. Every business decision that pushed me further to the margins. "Just in case," she'd said, echoing my lawyer friend's caution. I thought back to the company holiday party 3 months ago when I was just starting to show. Victor had introduced Ivy to our biggest investor as the brains behind our new security protocol. The protocol I had conceptualized and helped develop before morning sickness had limited my office hours. When the investor turned to me with polite interest, Victor had waved dismissively and said, "This is just my wife, Fiona." The word had cut deeper than any insult. Your baby's heartbeat is strong, Dr. Henderson said, completing her examination. But I'm serious about the stress, Fiona. Whatever's happening, find a way to shield yourself from it. As I left the clinic, another text came through, this time from Victor. My parents are stopping by for dinner. Be home early to clean up. His parents, who had never approved of me, constantly compared me to Victor's ex-girlfriend. They had suggested after my second miscarriage that perhaps I wasn't meant to carry the Langley family line, and now they would meet Ivy. I started the car, hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The divorce papers in my desk drawer at home suddenly felt less like a last resort and more like an inevitability. I just needed to choose the right moment and ensure I wouldn't walk away empty-handed from the company I had helped build. When I pulled into our driveway, Victor's parents' luxury SUV was already parked outside alongside a sleek red sports car I didn't recognize. Through the front window, I could see Ivy gesturing animatedly while Victor's mother laughed appreciatively. They look like family. I took a deep breath and placed a protective hand over my belly. Don't worry, I whispered to my unborn child. I'll figure this out for both of us. I plastered on my best lawyer smile and walked through my own front door like I was entering a hostile courtroom. There she is, Victor's mother Esther exclaimed with synthetic enthusiasm. We were beginning to wonder if you'd forgotten about dinner. I had a doctor's appointment, I explained, setting down my purse. The appointment was at 2 p.m., Victor said, checking his watch pointedly. It's almost 6. I met his gaze steadily. The doctor had concerns about my blood pressure. She kept me for additional monitoring. A flicker of something, concern or guilt, crossed Victor's face, but Ivy quickly touched his arm. I made your favorite pasta sauce, she announced. Victor mentioned you've been craving Italian. I hadn't eaten Italian food since morning sickness began. Victor knew this. How thoughtful. I managed to notice Ivy was wearing yet another of my maternity tops, a designer, one my mother had sent from New York. Victor's father, Harry, emerged from the kitchen with a glass of scotch. Fiona, the house is looking a bit lived in today. Not feeling up to housekeeping? Before I could respond, Esther jumped in. Pregnancy is so difficult. When I was carrying Victor, I could barely function. Thank goodness Ivy stepped in to tidy up before we arrived. I glanced around my own home, suddenly seeing it through their critical eyes. I'd left in a rush that morning. Dishes in the sink, pregnancy books scattered on the coffee table, a half-folded basket of laundry on the armchair. Now everything was pristine with touches that weren't mine. Scented candles I avoided because they triggered my nausea. Flowers arranged in vases I rarely used. Dinner's ready, Ivy called from the kitchen. My kitchen, where I'd cooked countless meals for Victor, for his parents, for potential investors in the early days. We gathered around the dining table as Ivy served what was clearly a catering spread, though she accepted compliments as if she'd spent days preparing it. I recognized the pasta from Victor's favorite restaurant downtown. Fiona, aren't you going to eat? Victor asked, noticing I'd barely touched my food. The sauce smells off to me, I said truthfully. The rich garlic aroma was making my stomach turn. Ivy's smile faltered. I followed the recipe exactly. Pregnancy knows, I explained with forced lightness. Everything smells strange these days. Well, I think it's divine, Esther declared, taking an exaggerated bite. Ivy, you must share your secret. The secret is in the delivery fee, I muttered too quietly for anyone but Victor to hear. He shot me a warning look. As dinner progressed, I sat through 30 minutes of Ivy explaining my own company to me, with Victor nodding encouragingly at every word. She detailed the London expansion plans I drafted last year before our second miscarriage had sidelined me as if they were her original ideas. We're hoping to close the Buckingham account while we're there, she said casually. She swirled her wine. Who's going to London? I asked directly, looking at Victor. A moment of uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I thought I mentioned it, Victor said smoothly. Ivy and I leave this weekend for 10 days. The European team needs on-site leadership for the quarter. This weekend is the baby's anatomy scan, I said, my voice eerily calm even to my own ears. We'll finally know if it's a boy or girl. Victor blinked, genuinely caught off guard. Is that this weekend? I thought it was next month. It's been on our shared calendar for 13 weeks. I said, I remind you every Sunday during our planning call. The planning calls he'd been skipping for the past month. Harry cleared his throat. Son, surely you can reschedule this trip? The Buckingham account can wait. I felt a surprising rush of gratitude toward my father-in-law until he continued. Or perhaps Fiona can record it on her phone for you to watch later. That's what modern technology is for, isn't it? Victor nodded, relieved at the solution. Exactly. You can FaceTime me from the appointment. Ivy leaned forward, her expression a perfect mask of concern. I feel terrible about this. Maybe we could delay it by a day. I'd hate for Victor to miss something so important. Her performance was flawless. The supportive colleague, the thoughtful friend. I wondered how long she'd practiced it. No need, I said, pushing away my untouched plate. I'll manage on my own. I usually do these days. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table before Ivy jumped up. I almost forgot dessert. I made Victor's favorite triple chocolate cake. As she hurried to the kitchen, she bumped the table, sending her full glass of red wine directly into my lap. The liquid soaked through my dress, but worse, it drenched the handmade baby blanket I'd left on the chair beside me. Oh dear, I'm so sorry. Ivy gasped, grabbing a napkin and ineffectually dabbing at the spreading stain on the cream-colored yarn. It was an accident. Fiona, it's just a blanket, Victor said with an impatient sigh when he saw my expression. Ivy didn't mean it. My grandmother taught me how to make this, I said quietly, before she died. You're overreacting again, Victor hissed as his parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Something inside me snapped. 5 months of pregnancy hormones, years of diminishing respect, and a day of accumulated humiliations converged into perfect clarity. Am I? I stood up with wine dripping from my dress. Am I overreacting to finding your assistant in my clothes, in my house, serving my recipes, taking my place at work, and now ruining one of the few things I have left from my grandmother? Please, Victor, tell me exactly what the appropriate reaction should be. You're being hormonal, Harry interjected. Victor is under tremendous pressure with the company. The company I helped build, I cut in, turning to face him. The company that exists because of contracts I wrote and relationships I cultivated while your son was still figuring out how to code properly. Victor stood abruptly, grabbing my arm. A word in private, Fiona. Now. As he pulled me toward the hallway, I felt a sharp cramp ripple across my abdomen, but the real shock came when I glanced back and saw Ivy calmly settling into my vacated chair, picking up my fork and taking a bite of my untouched food, testing it, to see if I'd been lying about the smell. Victor practically dragged me into his home office, shutting the door with barely controlled rage. What the hell was that? He hissed, loosening his grip on my arm when he noticed the red marks his fingers had left. That was me finally speaking the truth, I said, rubbing my arm. Something this household seems allergic to lately. Do you have any idea what you've done? Victor ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair. Harry and Esther are our biggest investors now. Their fund controls 40% of our company. Our company? I laughed bitterly. When did you last use that word without Ivy standing next to you? Victor's expression hardened. This behavior needs to stop, Fiona. Your pregnancy doesn't give you license to jeopardize everything we've built because you're feeling insecure. Insecure? The audacity stole my breath. You moved your assistant into our house, Victor. She's wearing my clothes, using my office, taking credit for my work. Ivy has been crucial during your absence, he said as if my pregnancy were an inconvenient sabbatical I chose to take. The company can't pause because you decided to have a baby. We decided. I corrected it, feeling another sharp pain across my abdomen. At least that's what you said when the pregnancy test showed positive, right before you suggested we announce it at the company retreat. To, what was it? Humanize the brand. Victor had the decency to look momentarily ashamed, but recovered quickly. This tantrum puts us in a precarious position financially. If you can't control yourself, perhaps you should stay home until the baby comes. Stay home? I already barely have access to the company I co-founded. That I founded. He interrupted sharply. Let's be clear, Fiona. You helped with some paperwork in the beginning. I built this empire. The room seemed to tilt slightly. 10 years of partnership reduced to some paperwork now. Victor continued checking his watch. I need you to go back out there and apologize to everyone, especially Ivy. She's been nothing but helpful. Another pain stronger this time caused me to grip the edge of his desk. Something warm trickled down my inner thigh. Victor, I whispered. The fight drained from me. I'm bleeding. He stared at me blankly as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. The baby, I clarified with a note of panic entering my voice. I need to go to the hospital now. Victor's expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, annoyance, and finally reluctant concern. Are you sure this isn't some dramatic exit strategy? In answer, I shifted slightly, revealing the small crimson stain spreading across my dress. Shit, he muttered, then raised his voice. Ivy, can you come here? Not an ambulance call, not his parents, but Ivy. She appeared so quickly I wondered if she'd been listening at the door. What's... Oh! Her eyes widened at the sight of me, one hand clutching my belly, the other braced against the desk. Fiona needs to go to the hospital, Victor said. Can you get the car and maybe grab her hospital bag? Is it still in the nursery closet? He asked me. I nodded mutely, fighting back tears. At least he remembered that detail. I'll let your parents know Ivy, said efficiently, already texting as she left the room. And I'll drive so Victor can sit with you. 15 minutes later, I was in the back seat of our SUV, lying awkwardly across the leather, while Victor sat in the passenger seat, providing Ivy with directions to the hospital, as if she hadn't driven there with him 3 times for my previous prenatal appointments. Take Olympic Boulevard, he instructed. There's construction on Wilson Ave. Already rerouting, Ivy chirped, tapping our vehicle's navigation screen. The estimated time to Providence St. John's is 18 minutes. Cedar Sinai, I corrected through gritted teeth. My doctor is at Cedar Sinai. But Providence is closer, Ivy argued, not bothering to look back at me. My doctor and all my medical records are at Cedar Sinai. I repeated, another cramp seizing my abdomen from my high-risk pregnancy doctor. Victor turned to Ivy. She's right. It needs to be Cedar Sinai. The 18-minute drive felt endless. Victor spent most of it on the phone speaking in hushed tones about the London trip logistics while Ivy drove, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror with what could have been either concern or calculation. At the emergency entrance, Victor helped me out of the car while Ivy went to park. I can take it from here, I told him, trying to maintain some dignity despite the circumstances. You should get back to your parents. Don't be ridiculous, Victor said, though I noticed he was still texting as we approached the reception desk. The triage nurse took one look at my condition and immediately ushered me to an examination room. Victor followed, still distracted by his phone. Mr. and Mrs. Langley? A young doctor entered moments later. I'm Dr. Bentley. I understand you're experiencing bleeding at 22 weeks. Yes, I confirmed, and cramping. As the doctor examined me, Victor's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then at me. I need to take this, he said. It's the Singapore team. I'll be right outside. Dr. Bentley frowned as Victor stepped out, but continued her examination. Your baby's heartbeat is present, but weaker than I'd like. We need to get an ultrasound immediately and start medication to stop any contractions. A nurse began preparing, while another wheeled in an ultrasound machine. Where's your husband? Dr. Bentley asked, looking around as if Victor might be hiding in a corner. Work emergency. I said automatically the excuse I'd been making for him for months. The cold gel hit my stomach as the doctor began the ultrasound. The familiar whooshing sound of my baby's heartbeat filled the room, but it was different, faster, and more erratic. Is something wrong? I asked, panic rising in my throat. Dr. Bentley's expression was professionally neutral. Your placenta is showing signs of abruption. It's beginning to separate from the uterine wall. This is likely causing the bleeding and putting stress on the baby. What does that mean? Will my baby be okay? We need to stop this process immediately. You'll need complete bed rest medication and constant monitoring. If the separation continues, she paused. At 22 weeks, the baby isn't viable outside the womb yet. The door opened and I expected Victor, but instead Ivy walked in. Victor asked me to check on you, she explained to my confusion. He's still on his call, something about the merger timing being affected by your situation. She gestured vaguely at my medical emergency. Dr. Bentley looked between us, clearly confused. And you are? Ivy Chandler, Victor's executive assistant? She said smoothly, extending her hand as if this were a business meeting. I have medical power of attorney, if any forms need signing. You what? I tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. Mrs. Langley has never signed over medical power of attorney, Dr. Bentley said firmly, checking my chart. According to our records, her emergency contact is Bianca Washington. Bianca. My best friend, not my husband. There must be some mistake, Ivy insisted. Victor specifically added me to all Fiona's accounts last month. As if summoned by his name, Victor finally returned, pocketing his phone. Sorry about that. What did I miss? Dr. Bentley explained the situation again, while a nurse continued preparing medication. I barely heard them. My mind stuck on one horrifying detail. Victor had tried to give Ivy control over my medical decisions without my knowledge. I need to call Bianca, I said suddenly. Why? Victor frowned. I'm here now. Because, I said, meeting his eyes directly. I need someone here who actually cares if this baby lives or dies. Bianca arrived within 20 minutes, breathless and carrying coffee. She took one look at the scene, Victor in the corner on another call, Ivy hovering near the monitors, me pale against the hospital sheets, and immediately took charge. Out, she said firmly to Ivy. Family only. I'm practically family, Ivy protested, but Bianca was already physically steering her toward the door. Practically isn't legally, Bianca replied with professional sweetness. She'd handled Victor's PR for years. She knew how to make even the harshest dismissal sound pleasant. I'm sure you understand. Victor glanced up from his call. Ivy stays, he said, covering the mouthpiece. Actually, Dr. Bentley interjected, hospital policy limits visitors for high-risk patients. Given Mrs. Langley's condition, I'd recommend just one support person right now. Victor hesitated, clearly torn between his role as husband and CEO. Go handle your call, I said, surprising everyone, including myself. Bianca can stay with me. You two can go back to my in-laws and update them. The relief on Victor's face would have broken my heart if there had been anything left to break. I'll be back in the morning, he promised, already gathering his jacket. The Singapore deal. I know, I interrupted. It's important. After they left, Bianca pulled a chair close to my bed. Okay, what the actual hell is going on? And don't say nothing, because I've been watching this train wreck at the office for months. Over the next hour, as nurses came and went, checking monitors and administering medication to halt my premature labor, I told Bianca everything. The couch incident, the phone messages, the painful dinner, and finally the attempted medical authorization. That's not just scummy husband behavior, Bianca said in her marketing executive poise. That's potentially criminal. He can't just assign your medical decisions to his girlfriend. She's not his girlfriend, I said automatically, then laughed at my own denial. Sheesh, I sound pathetic. You sound like someone who's been gaslit for months, Bianca corrected. But that ends tonight. I'm calling Claudia. Claudia Morrison had been my closest friend in law school and now a partner at Goldman. Claudia specializes in high-asset divorces. She'd been warning me about Victor's behavior for months. While Bianca stepped out to make the call, a gentle knock came at my door. To my surprise, it was Dr. Henderson, my regular obstetrician. I was already here for another delivery, she explained, reviewing the notes Dr. Bentley had left. Fiona, what happened? Your blood pressure is dangerously high. Life happened, I said simply. Dr. Henderson sat on the edge of my bed. The medication is working. The contractions have stopped, but I'm concerned about the partial abruption. You'll need complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks, possibly until delivery. 2 weeks? The timeline spun through my mind. Victor would be in London. I'd be alone in a house where I increasingly felt like an unwelcome guest. At minimum, she confirmed. Any stress, physical exertion, or emotional upset could trigger further separation and endanger the baby. Bianca returned, introducing herself to Dr. Henderson. I've spoken with Claudia. She can be here in 30 minutes. A lawyer? Dr. Henderson asked, eyebrows raised. My husband tried to give his assistant medical power of attorney over me without my knowledge. I explained. I need to protect myself and my baby. Understanding dawned in Dr. Henderson's eyes. I see. In that case, I should inform you that your husband listed someone named Ivy Lee as an authorized person to receive your medical information when he updated your paperwork last month. He what? Bianca exclaimed. I never signed updated paperwork, I said. Dr. Henderson's expression grew concerned. The electronic form was submitted through our patient portal with your credentials. Show me, I demanded. Minutes later, I was looking at a screen displaying my patient profile. Sure enough, Victor and Ivy were both listed as authorized contacts. The change had been made using my login, but I hadn't done it. He has my password, I realized. We've always shared login. Bianca was already typing furiously on her phone. Claudia says to document everything. We need screenshots, dates, and times. My mind, despite the sedatives flowing through, clicked into lawyer mode. We need to check all my accounts, banking investments, and emails. If he did this, what else has he done? By the time Claudia arrived, Bianca had already compiled a disturbing list using my credentials. Victor had changed my banking notifications to go to his email, removed me as an authorized user on 2 of our joint credit cards, and transferred my remaining shares of our company to a new holding account. He's been systematically cutting you off, Claudia observed, looking impeccable despite the late-hour classic pre-divorce maneuver. He's planning to divorce me? I asked incredulously. More likely he's preparing leverage, Claudia explained. If you found out about Ivy and threatened divorce, he'd be positioned to claim you abandoned the company, contributing nothing for months. While I was pregnant with his child, I added bitterly. Men like Victor don't see pregnancy as work. Claudia said, they see it as a hobby. So what do we do? Bianca asked. Claudia pulled out her laptop. We get ahead of him. First, we secure emergency orders preventing any further financial changes. Second, we document his abandonment during a medical emergency. Third, she smiled thinly, we use my firm's forensic accountants to follow every penny he's moved in the last year. I don't want to stress Fiona further, Bianca protested. The doctor said to avoid stress. I interrupted. Nothing would stress me more than letting Victor take everything while I'm stuck in this bed. My phone buzzed with a text from Victor. Parents upset about dinner scene. Fix this when you're back. London trip still on. Ivy making arrangements. We should discuss your role at the company after the baby. Maybe it's time to step back permanently. The audacity fueled something cold and focused within me. I showed the others. He's not even trying to hide it anymore, Bianca whispered. Because he thinks you're trapped, Claudia said, physically vulnerable, financially dependent, emotionally compromised. But I'm not, I replied. A plan forming in my mind. I'm angry, and I'm still a damn good lawyer. For the first time in months, I felt clarity cutting through the fog of gaslighting and manipulation. I might be confined to bed rest, but my mind was free and ready for battle. Let's give Victor exactly what he wants, I said, surprising them both. When he visits tomorrow, I'll be the perfect apologetic wife. I'll tell him I understand the London trip is necessary. I'll even suggest Ivy should handle my projects permanently. Why would you do that? Bianca asked, confused. I smiled grimly. Because the best time to gather evidence is when they think they've already won. When Victor finally visited the hospital the next morning, He brought flowers, lilies which he'd forgotten made me sneeze, and a concerned expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked, setting the bouquet on the windowsill. "Better." I smiled weakly, playing my part. The medication stopped the contractions. "Good, good." He glanced at his watch. "And the doctor? What did they call it?" "The abruption, placental abruption," I supplied. "It's stabilized, but I'll need complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks." Victor's face fell. 2 weeks? But who's going to— He trailed off, perhaps realizing how selfish the question would sound. "Bianca's offered to help," I said, watching him carefully. "And I was thinking maybe this is a sign." "A sign?" I nodded, channeling the submissive wife he clearly wanted. "About my role at the company. You were right. Maybe I should step back permanently." The relief on his face was immediate and unmistakable. "I'm glad you're seeing reason, Fiona. Parenthood will be a full-time job for you." "For you, not for us." "Exactly," I agreed. "And Ivy seems more than capable of handling my projects." Victor sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly happy. "I've been so worried about overwhelming you. You're making the right decision for yourself and the baby." I turned my face away briefly. Ostensibly emotional, but really hiding my disgust when I looked back, I'd manufactured tears. "I just want everything to go back to normal," I whispered. "Can we please put all this tension behind us?" Victor squeezed my hand. "Of course. I know pregnancy hormones have been making you irrational." I swallowed my retort and nodded. "I'm sorry about dinner. Please apologize to your parents and Ivy for me." "Already handled," he assured me. "Now about the London trip. You should go." I interrupted. "The company needs this deal." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "You sure?" "Positive. Bianca will stay with me and I'll FaceTime you after the anatomy scan." By the time Victor left, he was practically floating. The perfect wife is back under control. His mistress accompanied him to London, and no more resistance to his plans. I watched him go, mentally recording every detail of his behavior for Claudia's affidavit. 3 days later, I was discharged with strict instructions for bed rest. Victor and Ivy had already left for London, but not before Victor had ostentatiously arranged for flower deliveries and meal services. His public display of husbandly concern. Bianca helped me settle into the guest bedroom downstairs since I couldn't manage the stairs to our master suite. "I can't believe he left for London knowing you'd be bedridden," she muttered, arranging pillows behind my back. "I'm counting on his selfishness," I reminded her. "It's what makes our plan possible." Over the next week, while confined to bed, I coordinated with Claudia's team remotely with Bianca acting as our courier. We gathered financial records, documented communication patterns, and built a comprehensive case showing how Victor had systematically undermined my position in both our marriage and our company. The anatomy scan revealed we were having a daughter. I scheduled the appointment deliberately during Victor's most important meeting in London, ensuring he'd miss it. When I called to share the news, Ivy answered his phone. "Victor's presenting to the board right now," she explained with exaggerated sympathy. "But I can tell him as soon as he's done, is it a boy or girl?" "That's for Victor to know when he decides I'm a priority," I replied pleasantly. "Feel free to pass that message along exactly as stated." He called back furious. Of course I recorded the conversation as he berated me for playing games and embarrassing him in front of Ivy. Every word was another nail in the coffin of our marriage and more evidence for our case. On day 9 of my bed rest, Victor's parents made a surprise visit. Esther carried an expensive gift bag. Harry wore his business negotiation face. "We were so concerned," Esther cooed, settling herself on the armchair beside my bed. Victor mentioned there were complications. "Almost losing your grandchild is indeed a complication," I replied mildly. Harry cleared his throat. "Victor tells us you've been emotional since the hospital, refusing his calls, making demands." "Demanding to be treated with basic human respect isn't emotional, it's rational," I countered. Esther placed the gift bag on my lap. We thought this might cheer you up. It's a little something for the nursery. Inside was an exquisite silver picture frame engraved with Baby Langley. It was genuinely beautiful and momentarily disarming. Thank you, I said sincerely. It's lovely. We hoped you'd think so, Harry said, his tone softening slightly. Now about this nonsense with Victor. Nonsense, I echoed. These accusations, he clarified. Ivy is just an employee. Victor assures us their relationship is purely professional. I laughed despite myself. Did he explain why his purely professional employee was sleeping in our bed while I took the couch? Esther waved her hand dismissively. A misunderstanding, Victor says. You've been imagining things. Does this look imagined? I reached for my phone and pulled up the photos I'd taken of Victor and Ivy together. Nothing explicit but unmistakably intimate moments caught around the office and our home. Harry's face darkened as he scrolled through them. Esther peered over his shoulder. Her expression shifted from a missile to shock. There's more, I said quietly. Much more explicit ones I'd rather not show my in-laws. What do you want? Harry asked bluntly. Businessman to the core. I want what I've earned, I replied. My fair share of the company I helped build, and Victor's absence from my life. You're asking for divorce? Esther whispered, scandalized. No, I corrected. Victor asked for divorce when he told me to jump in water to retrieve Ivy's earrings while I was bleeding and potentially miscarrying. I'm simply agreeing to his terms. Harry studied me with new respect. I always told Victor you were the smarter one. He stood abruptly. We'll talk to our son. After they left, I texted Bianca. In-laws visited. Phase 1 is complete. 3 hours later, my phone exploded with calls and texts from Victor. I let them all go to voicemail. Each increasingly desperate message, documented by Claudia's team. That evening, I finally felt strong enough to briefly leave my bed, leaning heavily on Bianca. I made my way to what should have been the nursery, wanting to find the perfect spot for the new silver frame. When I opened the door, I froze in disbelief. The nursery, my carefully designed yellow and gray sanctuary with the crib I'd selected, the rocking chair that had been my grandmother's, the wall of children's books was gone. In its place was a sleek home office complete with Ivy's degrees on the wall, her designer handbags on the shelf, and her laptop open on the desk. She moved in, Bianca gasped. Completely moved in. My hands trembled as I touched the desk. A planner lay open revealing Ivy's meticulous handwriting. Baby's room too depressing, converted to productive space. And in the margin, too many miscarriages to count. The silver frames slipped from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. The annual Crystal Gala was the company's most prestigious event, a night where investors, clients, and tech industry elites gathered to celebrate achievements and preview upcoming innovations. I'd planned every detail of the previous 5 galas, from menu selection to speaker lineups this year. Victor had smoothly transitioned those responsibilities to Ivy. You're not seriously considering attending? Bianca asked, watching me apply makeup in my vanity. Dr. Henderson said, bed rest for 2 weeks minimum. Dr. Henderson also said to avoid stress, I replied, carefully concealing the dark circles under my eyes. And nothing would stress me more than missing tonight. It had been 3 days since discovering my nursery transformed into Ivy's office. 3 days of ignoring Victor's increasingly frantic calls from London. 3 days of finalizing my strategy with Claudia. Tonight, Victor and Ivy would return expecting to make a triumphant entrance announcing the successful Buckingham acquisition. They wouldn't expect to see me there. That was the point, at least. Use the wheelchair, Bianca insisted, helping me into the midnight blue gown we'd selected. Empire waist, flowing fabric that emphasized my pregnancy rather than hiding it. Only until I need to stand. I agreed. The gown was complimented. I wore a simple diamond necklace, my grandmother's, one of the few pieces of jewelry Victor hadn't borrowed for Ivy. When we arrived at the grand ballroom of the Marquis Hotel, heads turned. Victor had apparently told key people I was too unwell to attend, making my appearance something of a sensation. Claudia met us at our table, immaculate in a crisp black suit. "Everything's in place," she murmured, passing me a sleek tablet. "Victor's minority investors are very interested in what you have to say." William Buckingham himself approached our table, silver-haired and imposing in his custom tuxedo. "Mrs. Langley, what a delightful surprise! Your husband led us to believe you were indisposed." "Mr. Buckingham," I smiled, extending my hand, "I wouldn't miss this for the world." "I understand congratulations are in order on the acquisition." He studied me curiously. "Victor mentioned you'd stepped back from company operations." "Did he?" I asked innocently. "How interesting, considering I personally drafted the initial acquisition proposal last spring." William's eyebrows rose fractionally, the private equity equivalent of shocked gasps. "Perhaps we should discuss this further." He suggested taking the seat beside me. For the next 20 minutes, I carefully laid the groundwork, sharing my institutional knowledge of Buckingham's business model and our integration plans. By the time Victor and Ivy made their grand entrance, William Buckingham was fully in my corner. The room's attention shifted to the doorway where Victor stood with Ivy on his arm. Her red dress is inappropriate for both a business function and her supposed role as executive assistant. They faltered momentarily upon seeing me. Victor's confident smile slipped before he recovered. "Darling," he exclaimed too loudly, crossing to our table. "What a wonderful surprise! Should you be out of bed?" "I wouldn't miss your big night," I replied warmly as if nothing were amiss. "Mr. Buckingham and I were just discussing the acquisition." Victor's eyes darted nervously between us. Fiona always had a perfect memory for details. He laughed. His hand squeezed my shoulder with warning pressure. "More than memory," William corrected. "Your wife has an impressive grasp of strategy. The integration plan she outlined is exactly what my team has been advocating." Ivy stepped forward, unable to contain herself. "I'm sure Fiona remembers our earlier drafts, but the final approach was completely restructured based on our London meetings." William frowned. "And you are?" "Ivy Chandler, Chief Strategy Officer." She supplied confidently. "Executive Assistant," I corrected softly. Though titles seem fluid these days. The awkward moment was interrupted by the announcement that dinner would be served. Victor seized the opportunity to guide me away from William. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "You're supposed to be home resting." I felt miraculously better once I documented the conversion of our baby's nursery into Ivy's office. I replied pleasantly, particularly her note about not counting on this pregnancy. Victor paled. "She was just being practical. The room was sitting empty." "The room was ready for our daughter." I cut him off. "The daughter you couldn't bother to see on ultrasound." "Fiona." Victor lowered his voice, glancing around nervously. "Let's not create a scene." "Creating scenes is apparently Ivy's department," I observed. "I'm simply here to support my husband and company as I've always been." Victor's relief was palpable. He thought I was backing down. Another emotional outburst averted. "Thank you for understanding. Now it would probably be best if you limited your conversations with investors tonight. The Buckingham details are sensitive." "Of course," I agreed mildly. "I'll stay focused on my role." The dinner proceeded with excruciating politeness. Victor repeatedly redirected conversations away from me while Ivy inserted herself at every opportunity. I maintained a serene smile throughout, waiting for the moment Victor would take the stage. When the time came for his speech, I squeezed his hand. "Knock 'em dead, darling." Victor approached the podium with his characteristic confidence, launching into carefully scripted remarks about innovation partnership and future growth. He praised key team members, giving Ivy particular emphasis, while relegating me to a brief mention as my supportive wife as he built toward the announcement of the Buckingham acquisition. I caught Claudia's nod from across the room. It was time. "And now, before I share our exciting news," Victor continued, "I'd like to invite my wife to join me despite her current health challenges. Fiona has always been my biggest champion." The room applauded as Bianca helped me from my wheelchair. Victor's invitation wasn't part of the original program. It was damage control, an attempt to reassert our united front. I approached the stage slowly, one hand supporting my belly, the other clutching the tablet Claudia had provided. Victor extended his hand with a camera-ready smile that didn't match the warning in his eyes. Taking the microphone, I smiled at the assembled crowd. Thank you all for being here tonight. As many of you know, Wi-Fi Enterprise began in our apartment 6 years ago. What fewer people remember is that before it was a tech company, it was a legal entity that I created with contracts I drafted, protected by patents I filed. Victor's smile remained fixed, but his complexion whitened as chief legal officer and co-founder. I continued pleasantly. I've always believed in transparency with our investors and partners, which is why I feel obligated to share some concerning developments. With a tap on the tablet, the screens around the ballroom changed from the company logo to a series of damning financial documents and communications. What you're seeing, I explained calmly, is evidence of systematic financial misconduct, unauthorized personal expenses, and improper transfer of company assets, all executed within the past 6 months. The room erupted in murmurs. Victor lunged for the microphone. "Fiona is unwell," he announced desperately. "Pregnancy complications have affected her judgment." "I can assure you." I continued stepping away from his grasp. "My judgment is perfectly sound. Sound enough to document everything. Sound enough to file these findings with the SEC this morning. And sound enough," I added, turning to face Victor directly, "to serve you with divorce papers." From my clutch, I produced an envelope which I pressed into his trembling hands. "You told me to jump in water while I was miscarrying," I said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You told me if I didn't, we'd get divorced. Consider this me finally taking your advice." 3 months later, I sat in my new apartment, rocking my newborn daughter Mila, in the same chair that had once been destined for the nursery Victor had destroyed. The gentle morning light filtered through sheer curtains, casting a peaceful glow across her sleeping face. "She has your nose," Bianca observed, setting a mug of decaf coffee on the side table next to me. "Thank goodness." I smiled, tracing Mila's delicate features with my finger. And my stubbornness, apparently. The nurse said she's never seen a preemie with such a strong grip. Mila had arrived 5 weeks early, perhaps spurred by the stress of the gala confrontation. But unlike my previous pregnancies, this time my body had held on long enough. At just over 4 cm, she was small but perfect, with a determination that had impressed even the NICU doctors. "The Langley women persevere," Claudia remarked, entering with a stack of documents. "Speaking of which, the final settlement conference is scheduled for next week." The aftermath of my public revelation had been swift and devastating for Victor. The SEC investigation had uncovered even more financial improprieties than we'd initially documented. Major investors led by William Buckingham had called for Victor's resignation. The company's stock had plummeted, then stabilized when an interim leadership team took over. Ivy had disappeared the night of the gala, withdrawing nearly $220,000 from the company accounts before fleeing. Last I heard, she was in Singapore, already attached to another rising tech executive. "How's the new practice coming along?" I asked Claudia, adjusting Mila's blanket. "Morrison and Langley Family Law is officially open for business," she announced. "Our first clients start next week. 3 women in tech with similar stories to yours. Apparently your case inspired them to seek help." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd abandoned my legal career to support Victor's ambitions, only to find myself building a new practice from the ashes of our marriage, one specifically designed to protect spouses with stake in family businesses. Bianca's phone chimed. "Victor is downstairs," she reported. "Security wants to know if they should send him up." My heart rate quickened slightly. Mila remained peaceful in my arms, anchoring me. "Sure," I decided. "I guess it's time." Since Mila's birth, Victor had made multiple attempts to see her, sending elaborate baby gifts that I donated and leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. I'd allowed him limited hospital visits under Bianca's supervision, but had maintained firm boundaries. When Victor entered, he looked significantly different from the confident man I married. His designer clothes hung loosely on his frame, and gray had appeared at his temples. He carried a small, tasteful gift bag with no ostentatious displays this time. Fiona, he began softly, eyes fixed on Mila. Thank you for seeing me. This is about Mila, not me, I reminded him. She deserves to know her father despite everything. Victor nodded, remaining in the doorway as if afraid to fully enter the space I'd created without him. She's beautiful, he whispered. She looks just like you. Would you like to hold her? I offered, surprising both of us. He approached cautiously, taking Mila from my arms. His eyes welled with tears as she stirred slightly, then settled against him. I've lost everything, he said after a long silence. The board voted unanimously to remove me. My parents have barely spoken to me since the gala. Even my friends. He trailed off, shaking his head. Actions have consequences, Victor, I said without malice. Something you never seemed to believe applied to you. I know, he acknowledged, still gazing at Mila. I didn't appreciate what I had until it was gone. I keep thinking about that night when you told me you were bleeding and I didn't believe you. If I could take back one moment. Don't, I interrupted. Don't rewrite history. You showed me exactly who you were, repeatedly. It wasn't one moment. Victor nodded, accepting the truth of my words. The settlement offer, he said after another pause. I've instructed my lawyers to accept all your terms. This was unexpected. Victor had been fighting the division of assets fiercely, particularly my claim to 52% of company shares. Why the change of heart? I asked. It's what you deserve. He said simply, what you earned. I built my success on your foundation, then tried to erase you from the story. I can't undo that, but I can acknowledge it. An acknowledgement, years too late, but still meaningful. I nodded. My acceptance. As Mila began to fuss, Victor returned her to me, his fingers lingering briefly on her tiny hand. I'd like to be part of her life, he said, whatever way you deem appropriate. We'll work something out. I agreed. Supervised visits to start. After Victor left, Bianca and Claudia exchanged meaningful looks. That was surprisingly mature of him, Bianca admitted. Desperation can be a powerful teacher, Claudia observed, though I'll still want that settlement in writing before I believe his transformation. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Victor's mother, Esther, standing awkwardly with a homemade casserole. I hope I'm not intruding, she said tentatively. I just wanted to see my granddaughter. The woman who had once dismissed me as unworthy now stood humbly requesting entrance to my life. I thought about turning her away, about holding on to the hurt she'd caused, but Mila deserved a grandmother who wanted to know her. Come in, I said, stepping aside. She just woke up. As Esther cooed over Mila, I moved to the window overlooking the city. In the reflection, I could see the tableau behind me. My daughter, my friends, my new beginning. The nursery furniture I'd so carefully chosen now filled a different room, in a different home. The company I'd helped build was evolving without me, though my shares would ensure Mila's future was secure. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my own story. That evening, as I put Mila down in her crib, I whispered the same words my grandmother had once shared with me. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted, to find everything you actually deserve. Mila grasped my finger with her tiny hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. Like mother, like daughter. We both knew how to hold on to what truly mattered.